Welcome back to the Afterword, a conversation about the future of words. We are so glad to have David Taylor and Chara Itoka here with us to continue our conversation about ways we influence the world from and in our own backyards. We left off our last episode talking about dreaming smaller, and I want to talk about dreaming smaller some more. When we think about getting started influencing people in our own backyards, influencing the people who are closest to us, personally, we're not critiquing the nonprofit industry anymore, but just personally, what does it mean to start small and start slow?
I would say pay close attention to your intent, especially as you're deciding on the steps you want to take. Consider the impact of your words and your actions, the complexities, the nuances, the subtleties. Intent is important, and make sure that your approach is as inclusive as possible. If you're designing something, or if I'm creating something, I consider myself also a creative, even though I use my left brain a lot. But make sure that the key stakeholders are involved from the beginning. And that really takes time. It takes time to consider and to be intentional about the steps you take in the approach that you're gonna choose as you move forward. So starting slow makes a lot of sense to me, because you can remain considerate, not get ahead of yourself, and not get ahead of the people that you are either serving or the people that are around you, even your community.
I think in our American society, we define success in terms of progress and growth, but growth is not always measurable, and success can be fleeting. It takes time and patience to see change that will endure and last. And I think relationships grounded in love do not require a tangible measure of progress. Love is not a trajectory that can be measurable. Love is an end in itself. So I think about momentum and the work we're doing with group mentoring around bikes with under-resourced students. And I think, are we changing the trajectory of their lives? You know, people want to know, are they college bound? Are there these measurable outcomes? Well, maybe, we hope so. But what if we are merely providing a small window of time for under-resourced middle and high school students with a ton of trauma and sorrow and hardship to experience moments of joy and belonging and adventure on a bike? That moment, I think, has immense value, whether or not they go to college or fit into some measurable box that we can check and pat ourselves on the back about, because every young person deserves to have that experience of delight in childhood.
David, I want to just follow up real quick. You had shared with me earlier, that you had just come off the road night before last, and you were one of the youngest guys out there with mentors of a 72-year-old. And you said, I think, something very poignant. You said this is a lifelong outlet. That you can't put a measurement on that.
Amy, I think that's right. That the bike can be, it's one of our first adventures of independence, where we get to grab the handlebars and we're in control of it, for better or worse, whether we end up in the ditch or not. But it is something that I just rode from Kansas City to St. Louis, over 300 miles, self-supported, carrying my camping gear. And, it's this adventure and delight that maybe we're introducing this means of not just transportation to a job, but this way of getting vigorous exercise and coping with trauma and just adventure and recreation and play. So yeah, and it's something they can pursue the rest of their lives.
Yeah, so good. That's the type of thing you can't measure. And you mentioned relationships, and Chara, you did as well, as you were thinking about what is your intent. And having a relationship or relationships with people that you help is key. How can you begin to develop meaningful relationships with people you want to help, regardless of cultural differences, demographic, or socioeconomic variance? And so, David, I'll start with you first, and then let's listen to what Chara has made to say.
Proximity is an important word for me, and I think it's essential for building trust. I don't think we can helicopter in and work with people and then helicopter out. That being in proximity to others is critical to building relationship, and I think all change happens through relationship. So we must show up consistently over time to begin to have meaningful relationships. And this is the reason that, Amy, you and I used to be neighbors, and that my wife and I moved to the Nicholtown community is we wanted to be proximate with people of color. We wanted to be neighbors and share a cup of sugar, or if we're baking and needed something, or just sit on the front porch with each other and hear stories and understand the African American experience, and that's been so rich. So healthy relationships with others depend to a larger degree on self-awareness, knowing ourselves, our biases and blind spots. It requires an understanding of how culture is operative and the importance of cultural competency, having curiosity and respect for those who are different and have different cultural norms. We must seek to understand how systemic forces of race and class impact relationships. And Amy, we in Holland, we could have a whole different podcast on that topic. So, but understanding others' experience and having a posture of humility and respect and curiosity to understand that and then examine our own biases is so important.
That's excellent. Yeah. How about you, Chara?
I just want to say all the principles that David just explained are so important, super, super important. I was like snapping all the way in Rwanda. I would say that authenticity is really important in relationships. Being authentic in how you approach people, respecting their entire being without exalting what they seemingly lack above the essence of who they are. I think, especially when you are in this type of work where you're helping, you could take that kind of deficit approach, perspective on things, and really focus on the needs all the time. And oftentimes people just want to know you. People just want you to see them and acknowledge them, just like we want to be known as well. So I would add that you should never look down on another person, which sounds really simple, but there are power dynamics embedded in our interactions that we need to be aware of. Don't focus on your agenda or the institution's agenda you're representing. Never put that above just that foundational respect for another human being. And something I've also noticed in the field that turns me off personally too, when I've been on the receiving end of this, is don't be condescending. Don't pity folks. People can tell, and it really causes damage when you're trying to establish a relationship.
I think those are great answers. They're harder to live out than they sound, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I don't think I even know when I sound condescending. I'm sure the person hearing me knows.
Right, Holland. I mean, and that's what David was saying, know your own biases. Well, that's half the problem. We don't know our own biases. We're biased about our biases. So, it just compounds the issue sometimes.
One of the ways that I think all of us are probably helping and will continue to help, and people will continue to help in this way, is by making donations to charities or nonprofit organizations. And having worked for several nonprofit organizations over several years, I just want to come right out and say that I do not think that fundraising versus program spend percentages should figure into how donors decide which charities to support. And I know a lot of people use that as their one and only metric. I think it should not exist as a metric. I think donors should be a lot more rigorous in their criteria than that. And once you've decided to just support, I think you should give a lot, whatever that means to you, whether it's time or money or both. But I want to know what you think. How do you think we should vet the organizations we give to or volunteer with, whether they're local, national, or international organizations? David?
I think of vetting organizations, and I've been both on the church side and the nonprofit side. I've been on a number of nonprofit boards, and it is tough. I think there are important considerations, and a few come to mind is, does the organization give agency to the people they serve? Do they give them voice? Or is it client? Are they just the recipient? Or are they a partner? Do they operate? I think these two words are really important, for or with. So are they acting for somebody or acting in partnership with? And I think that's an important paradigm shift. I think we ought to be skeptical of slick presentations or oversimplification of issues that I think we've alluded to. I think we ought to be wary of promises of bold outcomes. I think an asset-based approach versus a deficit approach. And I also think the question of charity versus justice, of looking at systemic issues versus just asking for a handout is important. Chara, what would you add to that?
Everything you said resonates with me. Absolutely. I would add that I'm always trying to, find out what the organization's values are, like truly, and how it's practiced. So, organizations articulate their values all the time, and that's what draws us in. There's some organizations with great names and reputations and big budgets, but their practice, it's way off, right? And you won't know that on the surface. So I think you really need to, before investing money, before volunteering, I try to find out the information that I need to know so that I can find out if my values align with this organization's values truly and how it's actually lived out. So that you may not find out on a website. You may need to conduct some deeper research. It could be online, but also talking to people who currently or previously worked with the organization. Community reports, I love accountability that comes from downward accountability, not just upward accountability. Seeing what participants in their programs say, civil society statements on this organization and the work that they've done, just that really helps me ensure that I'm truly aligning with the practice of this organization and the values are really being lived out. That's when I feel comfortable supporting an organization. And that does take maybe a little bit of time, but I like going below the surface because sometimes the surface doesn't tell the truth about the practice.
Yeah, these are so good. Helen, did you want to follow up?
Well, we could do a whole podcast. In fact, we're talking about doing a whole podcast on new approaches to philanthropy. And by the way, did you get that email I sent you about that, or that link to that organization I was suggesting? Because I think we've come up on some really innovative ideas for figuring out who to support and how to do so. Right? Absolutely.
And just like you were talking about in our previous episode with Samuel Parker and Matali Perkins, and you need, when you're going to tell stories that cross borders, then you need to be with people. And this is kind of what you were talking a little bit about, Chara. I love this downward accountability. And then we had Ali Narani and Stephen Bauman when we were talking about human rights and ethical storytelling. And they use that word, David, that you were talking about is agency. And again, just such a vital thing for that impact when you're thinking about how do you want to step into these helping organizations. So these are so good. But you two both have amazing gift mixes and you have accessed those. And Chara, you have even said that, you've given us a little hint into some of your creativeness, and David sharing a little bit about your bike rides and that type of thing. So you have both accessed your gifts and your resources to help others. Tell us some other ways that might be helpful as you can mentor someone else who might be interested in accessing those. Chara, what do you think?
I think it really starts with, and we talked about this, David has brought this up as well, really knowing yourself and what you have to offer individuals in the community and seeing if it aligns with what they say that they need. And moving away from this top-down approach and automatically thinking that you will add value to a community. I think that causes a lot of problems along the way. Just listening, seeing how you could really align. I think sitting with, I could speak for some communities that I've done like grassroots work where I would literally, you come, you sit down, you eat cola, you know what I mean? You have to sit with communities before you start talking about how you're going to implement this thing that you believe that they really need. And I do think sometimes communities feel like that when you say okay, I would like to offer this, or this is the project, this is a program, they'll say yes to it because they feel okay, you're obviously outside of my community and you're going to bring this value. Yeah, I believe what you have to say. But as long as I maintain my honesty and I try to manage expectations and I make it clear that I'm not saving anyone, that we're going to work alongside each other, I think that's how to use your gifts, use your resources, use your abilities in a more productive way, is really to come with a listening ear and connects to the humility David was talking about before, and not taking a top-down approach, really standing side by side with communities and ensuring that what you would like to offer is what they actually would like you to bring to the table, because they also have a lot to bring to the table.
Absolutely. But Chara, David, before you answer, Chara, I have a follow-up question. You are a creative. You have mentioned that a little bit. Do you feel that sometimes when that creativity is allowed to shine, that others are drawn to you because of what you have, because they have some of that similar gift mix?
Yeah, I definitely do. So my creative side is seen in a couple different ways. One is I worked in manufacturing. I worked in fashion for a while, which is it's really different from some of the public sector, proper government. I was a politician. I was a minister in the Liberian government. So it's what is that? How do these make sense? But for me, I also use my creativity as I'm consulting. I think you really do need to be creative in finding solutions for multidimensional issues and problems that my clients have. So I find that when I'm around other, my students that are arts, design, and culture focused, I'm able to bring a certain perspective to them. I will put on that hat of being around other creatives. But then when I'm sitting and I'm trying to create a solution for a problem that might be in a community, it might be with a bank, something much larger, we have to be flexible. We need to think outside of the box, or some of us don't believe there even is a box. So creativity comes out and it's very useful in whatever I'm doing. So if it's in the arts space, or if it's in the kind of more international development traditional space, I will need to be creative. And I benefit from being around other creatives, especially when you're trying to make something new or you're dealing with something very complex.
Oh, I'm so glad you unpacked that a little bit further, because that really gives us a glimpse into that multifaceted approach that you bring to who you are and what you do. That's great. So, David, how about you? What are some ways that we can access our unique gifts?
I think in our context that we tend to have blinders about community gifts and assets. And so the community that I'm working in is becoming a bike mecca. And there are a lot of highly educated, wealthy, a lot of men who are into cycling, and they'll spend up to $10,000 on a bike. And like, okay, I can take my interest in biking and mentor young people. And yeah, maybe there is a value in building relationships with people like that, because that they'll learn how to navigate the world and that segment of society. But there are also people in under-resourced communities who know and love cycling, but they don't have the fancy bike or all the equipment or the spandex to wear. And yet they can be so valuable in that the students see themselves in those mentors, and they know the mentors understand the journey and the challenges and the obstacles. So I think it's seeing openly and broadly the gifts that a community offers, and not shortchanging students of the assets of those populations.
That is so good. It's not shortchanging those assets. And I think that's where that creativity comes in when we think about using our gifts and our resources, because, it's just like the body. We can't all be hands. We can't all be ears. We can't all be feet. But together we have something that's beautiful, and accessing that as a community for both of you, that's just a great way to sum it up. So I appreciate those answers.
Well, we like to end every episode with a question, a signature question, we call it. We ask for a metaphor. So I'm going to ask you guys to give us a metaphor for influencing our own circle.
So, Holland, I'll jump in on that. And I would say my metaphor is a hearty pot of stew. And I bring a potato. A friend brings a few carrots. Others bring spices. Another friend would bring a turnip and kale. Others bring onions or collards. We all bring something to contribute. And that slowly cooks together into a tasty stew that is nourishing both to the body and to the soul. It is the collective impact of everyone's contribution that makes it nourishing.
That's a fantastic metaphor. Thank you for sharing. Chara?
David, that makes me feel like all warm, and I want to eat some stew. It's 12:30 a.m. Okay. So I would say that I can't get over this, one of my absolute favorite quotes. So it actually comes from there. So I would say that influencing your own circle is about kneeling and kissing the ground. Let me explain. So Rumi has a quote that says, "Let the beauty we love be what we do." There are hundreds of ways to kneel and kiss the ground. And for me, influencing others is in many ways a service. And there's beauty in that. It should be rooted in love. And there isn't only one way to serve and have an impact. And your way may not look like my way, and vice versa. And if you're authentic, you're self-aware, you're intentional about listening to others, and you apply what you're learning, you adjust as you go, I believe that you'll find your way to kneel and kiss the ground. You'll find your way to have a positive impact.
Oh, these are beautiful. I just am I think with the kneeling and kissing the ground in so many ways and the stew, what a great, lovely wrap up of this episode. That was a tough episode to talk about this topic. So thank you so much.
Chara, where can folks learn more about your work or connect with you?
I can be reached at my website, theitokagroup.com. You can also find me on Medium, where you can find a bit of my writing. And I'm on all social media platforms. If you want to reach me, I would love to hear from you.
So I did not realize that you were on Medium.
Oh, yes. Check me out.
Okay. All right. David, how can listeners connect with you and learn more about Momentum Bikes?
You can follow us on Facebook, or our website is www.momentumbikeclubs.org, and you can reach out to us there. We are an initiative of Parks, Recreation, Tourism Management of Clemson University, and so you can find us there as well. So really, thanks so much for the opportunity to be with you today.
I certainly enjoyed the conversation and learned a lot from this episode. So everyone can join us next week for a conversation. We'll be talking about garbage. There are probably some folks who say we do that every week. I don't know. We'll be talking about garbage and how, oddly enough, garbage is a major connector in the world. And when that gets disrupted, as it did a couple of years ago, what happens?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think this has been an amazing conversation. Thank you again to Chara and David. It's been such a joy to have you at the table tonight. We want to ask our listeners and our subscribers to leave us a review, rate us on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. Please become a subscriber to the afterwordpodcast.com. It does help us keep the conversation going. And as always, please remember, you are welcome at our table.